As Navita mentioned in that report, the decline in the coal industry comes as more oil and natural gas pipelines are coming into Texas. One of the places proposed for an oil pipeline, an area over the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone from North Texas to south of San Antonio. Now, those plans proved to be controversial and have since been scrapped. Here to discuss the events that led up to that announcement and where the pipeline will go now, Brendan Gibbons, environmental and energy reporter with the Rivard Report. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Myra.
So let's talk about the concerns with this pipeline plan. What was the overall issue?
Well, we are in Texas where there's been an oil and gas industry for a very long time, and so there are parts of the state where a new pipeline is no big deal. It's practically spaghetti under our feet, like probably right now. But in the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone area of the hill country where San Antonio gets its main source of drinking water from, the main source of drinking water for 2 million people in this region, there are very few of these kind of pipelines. There's a couple different reasons for that, one of them being that there's never historically been much oil production in the hill country. So it's a rare thing when you kind of get word that there's a big 30-inch crude oil transmission pipeline that's going to pass over the area where the very sensitive recharge zone of the aquifer that affects San Antonio. We first started hearing about this from landowners in Bandera County, and we got a couple emails from some of these people saying that they were getting letters about a company wanting permission to survey for their land, and we were able to get a copy of the letter that had the heading of Enterprise Products Partners, which is a major midstream oil and gas transmission company. And they were telling landowners that they wanted permission to survey their land for a pipeline that was going to run through a specific set of counties between Midland and South Texas, where they have a larger pipeline network. And I looked at the list. I could tell pretty clearly that there's no way for this pipeline to cross this area without crossing over the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone. And that's really what led to some pretty quick coverage that we had. We wanted to get that word out really quickly.
So there are no regulations or rules in place preventing a pipeline over the recharge zone?
Absolutely not. There's no regulations over pipeline routes in Texas. That is up to a company's choice and the ability to negotiate with landowners along the way. For a company to be able to take that property, they have to get permission from a judge through a process called eminent domain or condemnation, and they have to compensate the landowners fairly according to these court proceedings. And there's a lot of debate over what's fair. If you pay me only for a little bit of a strip of land through my property, are you only paying me for the value of that little strip of land, or should you be paying me for what it does to the entire value of the property? So that's why some of these landowners didn't want to see a pipeline going through their land.
So now we know that that pipeline will not be going over there through the recharge zone. So ultimately, why did that Houston-based company decide to stop these plans?
Yeah, that's a great question, framing it that way, because it was their choice to move it. They wouldn't have been forced to by any sort of regulations or anything like that. There were a couple different things that happened. One of them is the investment of the city of San Antonio in this area. Since 2000, San Antonio has been spending sales tax revenue to preserve areas of the recharge zone. And they've spent $250 million of sales tax money in this area so far, and mostly buying up the rights to develop the property from landowners who still live out there. And through this method, we've preserved nearly 160,000 acres. So in the one sense, this pipeline cuts right through this area we've invested so much money in. So the city had a literal financial stake in this. And as people at the city and Edwards Aquifer Authority were starting to gather more information, you were starting to see this discussion emerge over how are we going to respond to this? Does that make our investment moot? Does a conservation easement by a city trump a pipeline with these kind of rights? And so that was one thread of things. The other one was that many of the landowners in that area are pretty influential people, and some of them in the oil and gas industry. So we have oil and gas executives who live out there and didn't want to see this kind of infrastructure going through their own backyards. And so they were able to arrange, the landowners out there were able to arrange a meeting with the executives for Enterprise Products Partners, and following that meeting and the publication of a map of the pipeline, then they decided to move it.
So ultimately, the company and the city did not have to have that head-to-head conversation, because like you said, it was Enterprise Product Partners' decision to back off of this plan. So do we know where this pipeline is going to go?
We don't yet, and that's something I'm going to continue to follow. The company has no obligation to release route maps to the public. No company operating in Texas with a pipeline that stays inside state lines has that obligation at all. It's pretty rare for companies to release maps of their whole planned routes when they don't have to.
Interesting example with this specific one, but also a lot of interesting points about pipelines in general and the regulations or lack thereof that companies have to follow.
This issue is going to continue coming up over and over again because there's a lot of oil production in West Texas and natural gas production, and so those supplies have to get to market somehow. We'll actually be discussing a lot of these issues at a Rivard Report event next week called City Fest, and it's our annual Ideas Festival. It'll be going on from Wednesday through Friday at the Tobin Center and at St. Paul Square near downtown, and people can go to cityfestsa.org to learn more.
All right, always some good ideas that you guys come up with over there, so I'm sure that'll be an interesting event.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan.